All right, welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Brian Matthews from Hayward PD in California. He has over 26 years experience in law enforcement, and I'm really excited to have him as a guest on the show. So welcome, Chief Matthews. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I know we talked a little offline, and I have a lot of notes off our past conversation, and there are a lot of really great things that you're doing organizationally. I want to first maybe talk a little bit about you. 26 years is a long time to be in this profession. How did you get into law enforcement? What did those 26 years look like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I really didn't get turned on to law enforcement until I got into college. I'm the first law enforcement professional in my family. Never considered it as an option for a career. Really until I got into college and started looking at things, that made sense to me. I come from a team sports background, so I grew up playing baseball and soccer. Played a little bit of baseball in college, and so there was kind of this natural transition to the profession in the sense that, you wear a uniform, you have a collective group of people that are pulling in the same direction to achieve a common goal for community safety. Teamwork is critical to what we do. And, as a team athlete, there are physical and mental components to being good at your craft when you're playing sports, and there was a transition there as well. And so I went on a ride along. And I spent a shift with an officer in a neighboring city who really talked about the profession, talked about how much he enjoyed doing the work. And then I watched as he kind of drove around and went from call to call, solving community problems and helping people. And I thought, you know what? I think this is for me, and the rest is history.
There are a few things I wrote down, and the first thing I want to say about that is I think that's a testament to like you never know when you can inspire someone.
Hmm.
No, I don't know if that officer that you did the ride along with knew that he would be that inspiration for you and that that would be kind of that turning point of like, yes, I want to do this. I want to be like him. And I think that's, a message to everyone that you never know when you can impact someone's life trajectory. And for you, now it's been 26 years later and it all kind of stemmed, obviously maybe you had some interest before that, but the ride along sounded like maybe that was kind of that defining moment of like, yes, I definitely want to do this. And this is my like life trajectory moving forward. So I think
Yeah,
that that's really cool. I also love that you talked about a team mentality because as soon as you said team sports, that's what I wrote down. I was like, it's so similar in a lot of different ways of, having to be physically and mentally fit and perform at a high level, being there for your team, having that accountability, picking each other up when they're down, if you lose, you all lose, if you win, you all win type of mentality. So I love that you said team a lot because I do find that that is something in law enforcement that is really important that you guys view each other as a team and a family.
absolutely. It's paramount to what we do. We can't be successful if we're not, helping each other in that regard, understanding our roles as it relates to the bigger picture, what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. And so Um, I've, I'm a little biased, but I find that, team athletes tend to make, the best employees, in my opinion. I'm sure some will disagree, but
Yeah.
there's just that natural transition.
I think it creates a sense of unity too.
Mhm.
If it's like, hey, like we're in this together,
Absolutely.
and having kind of, and the other thing that I've had conversations before where it's like there's also that accountability that happens where it's like if, I'm going to use like a baseball reference because you said you played baseball, but like if maybe you drop the ball, you're like, man, that's on me. Having that
Absolutely.
accountability of like, sorry, that's on me, like my bad. And then having a team that supports you, like, we'll get it next time. So I think that there's that sense of unity that happens too, whether that's in
Absolutely. I think
sports.
that when you care about the people around you, you don't want to let them down, right? Like you want to make sure that you're able to perform at a high level because you're not just playing for yourself, you're playing for all of them too. And so the same is true for our work, without question. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said a couple times offline and just now, you talked about physical and mental wellness.
Mhm.
And you kind of need to have both to make it through this career. And you've been in this career for 26 years. Can you give a little bit of insight into some of the things that you've done within the last 26 years that have helped you to stay physically and mentally well physically and mentally fit so that you can have a long career?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the physical side. So, again, transitioning from team sports where, we did team workouts, we had fitness programs. Our head coach, when I played baseball in college, was actually certified in strength and conditioning. And so, carrying that into the role of being a police officer and understanding that, when public safety workers are functional athletes, right? The work that we are required to do at times is very, very physical. We carry a lot of equipment around all the time. And so making sure that the strength and conditioning components are there just to be able to accomplish the basic tasks of the job. But then when we talk about physical fitness and being physically prepared to do the job, you want to make sure that you have the ability to do that for a 30-year career. So I'll tell you right now, the workouts that I was doing on the front end of my career are very different than the ones that I do now because it's been 26 years and I'm old. Um, And so, it's not about, lifting a whole bunch of weight anymore. Now, there's still a weightlifting component to what I do, but a lot of core stability, a lot of balance, a lot of flexibility, and I got to get better at that, I'll be honest. But, those are the things that are going to prevent injury. Those are the things that are going to be able to help somebody get through a 30-year career as whole, as he or she possibly can. I mean, the goal is to get through a 30-year career and be able to enjoy the fruits of all the hard work and retirement. And so it's not just about when you're at work, it's about when we're done with this job too. So on the physical side, I've tried to keep that mindset throughout the course of my career. And it's not necessarily about intensity. It's not necessarily about, being motivated all the time. It's really about consistency
Mhm.
and doing things from a physical standpoint, even for brief periods of time on days you don't want to, where you're not feeling it. But it's important to making sure that you're going to be safe out there, and it's important to make sure that you're going to get through the end of the career as whole as we can, right? On the physical side.
100%.
Um, on the mental side, I think that I come from so my father was a counselor growing up. So I come from kind of a family background where talking about the impact of things, talking through emotions, being able to share out in a family setting was a norm in our household growing up. And so I think that that has transitioned here into the workplace for me personally. I know that nobody can get through a 30-year career on their own. It's not functionally possible. We all need somebody that we can talk to, that we can, offload with, whether that is, a close confidant or a mentor or personal friend, or whether that's somebody that has specialized training. Um, from a therapy standpoint, I think there's qualities for both of those things. And I've taken advantage of both of those things throughout the course of my career. And I know that's not always been acceptable to talk about in law enforcement. Given the history of this profession, I think that's still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. But it is incredibly important. We know that, police officers, when they go into the field, they're going to see and experience things that people shouldn't, right? They're going
Mhm.
to see people on their worst day. They're going to have to deal with things that are very, very traumatic. And we know that that compounds over time. There's enough research out there to know that, trauma, if left unattended, is going to surface at some point and probably manifest itself in a way that's unhealthy. Um, and so making sure that, we're doing this constant maintenance work, right, through the course of our career. You have to be able to offload some of that in a healthy, constructive way. And so I've tried to be mindful of that, and try to get people who are coming into the profession to understand that on the way in. It is okay to not be okay sometimes. It is okay to talk about how certain experiences in the field make you feel. I know that when we talked offline, I talked about we had an officer suicide in our organization. About 5 years before that, we had a line of duty death with a very close friend of mine who was shot and killed on a traffic stop. And so having those experiences and knowing how that can impact somebody's ability to continue to do this work. is incredibly important from a mental standpoint. If we're not whole ourselves, we're going to miss the mark when we're trying to take care of people in our communities.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. And there's so many things I want to kind of dissect within that. Um, Going back to the physical part of it, I love how you said that public safety are functional athletes. And I totally agree with you. And a lot of what you were saying was like, how can we stay physically fit so that we can do the functions of this career effectively and safely? And I think that that does change over time, and you're not old. When you said you're old, I was like, no, because that means that I'm getting old. Um, but I can relate to kind of that progression of wellness, like different phases of life, different phases of your career are going to require different training methods. And so if you have that why, and that's kind of what I wrote down here is like, for your physical fitness, it seemed to me, and maybe there's a deeper why, and you can maybe share that as well, but at least from a job perspective, your why is like, how can I do my job effectively, efficiently, and safely from a physical perspective? And that might change over time of what you do and how you do it. And I think that's important to remember that as we get older, maybe things look a little bit different, but maybe you still have that same why of like, how can I do my job within the role and the capacity that I'm in now? So I love that you said that. You also were talking about longevity. And I think that I've I have never personally walked into a room of officers and said, who wants to, after retirement, just not be able to move, not be able to do anything, or like die three years later. Like nobody wants to sign up for that. I think
Right.
that at our core, like everyone wants to have that longevity in their life and they want to feel as good as possible for as long as possible.
Mhm.
And so when you walk into a room and you say, hey, who wants to have like a really long and successful career? People are going to raise their hand. And then beyond
Absolutely.
that, how many of you want to have a long and successful retirement? And I don't think there'd be anyone who wouldn't raise their hand to say
Mhm.
like, yes, I want to have a long and successful retirement. Because like, what's the point? Like, if you get out of this career that you loved and then like that's it,
Yeah.
you want to be able to enjoy, your hard work and the fruits of your labor, like you said. But then it's like, okay, so how can we reverse engineer that and say, okay, this is the goal. You want to have that longevity. What are the steps and resources that have to happen in order for you to have that end goal? And it seemed like to me you had that mentality, and you said mindset a few times, but like you had that mindset of like, I want to have a long and successful career, and I want to have a long and successful retirement. And there are certain resources that I have to do, or practices that I have to do to make that happen. And you're 100% correct. And I'll stop talking after this because I know I'm rambling off, but I was really excited. Um, Consistency over motivation. That is mental training, and that is resiliency to me, is like when you can do the hard things when you don't want to do them. And I can't tell you, I mean, I am not a morning person. And I know that there's a lot of science behind like, don't snooze, like, get up, do the thing. I have to train myself to do that because inherently I want to snooze 5 times and I don't want to get up and do the thing. But it's that mental training. It's like you said, it's that consistency of like, no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do it, even if I don't want to. Even if I don't feel like I have the time to do it, I'm going to do it because my why matters more to me than how I feel in this moment. And I think there has to be that bigger picture of like, why are we doing these things? Why is it important? And use that as your motivation to get up when you don't want to.
I think that's very well said. And I know that in this profession, there are, and I've gone through this myself where, sometimes you forget the why, right? You get so caught up in the work, so caught up on the things that you have to get done. We get frustrated with things that are outside of our control. Um, and sometimes we forget the why. And I find that one of the things that has helped me, I'm a visual person, I'm a visual learner. And so, there's nothing wrong with some visual representation of your why on the mirror in the bathroom, on your computer monitor, so that you're constantly reinforcing that with yourself, with a visual aid, right? I mean, I think that that's something that I have used before, especially if I'm working towards a particular fitness goal or something like that. Um, I find it centers me around the why, because you can get caught up in so much other stuff and then it falls apart,
100%.
right? So,
100%. And I
yeah.
think that, and one of the things I like to teach is like the why has to come from you.
Hmm.
It can't come from anybody else.
Hmm.
You have to identify for yourself what is your why. And again, that can change over time with different seasons of life. Like maybe as a new officer, if you don't have a family, like maybe it is the job and the performance on the job. And then maybe if you start a family, now your why is because you want to be there for your family. And then as you
Hmm.
retire, maybe the why is that you want to have a longer, successful retirement. And I think that that changes, but having a why that you connect with that is really important to you, not a why that like someone assigns to you. Because if like,
Absolutely.
and especially me, like I'm an outsider coming in, if I walked into a police department and I'm like, your why should be this, they'd be like,
Hmm.
I don't even know you. Like you're a stranger. Who are
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe coming from you it would be a little bit different, but I still think that like in order to find that I'm going to say in quotes that motivation because again
Hmm.
like that's hard, but I think if you have something that's important to you and a bigger picture goal, then you're going to be more successful long term.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Yeah, good stuff.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you because we have this really interesting dynamic right now with the newer generation coming in versus kind of like the quote unquote old guard, the older
Mhm.
generation. And there's a few things that I've heard and that I've seen a little bit in the space that the younger generation is maybe more receptive to talking about wellness and to like receiving resources, whereas maybe some of the older generation is a little bit more resistant, just different generation. And also the challenge of getting younger officers to proactively prioritize things because we know that it's like when you feel young and good, you're like, I don't need that
Hmm.
yet. So, how do you navigate that generational divide between like the younger and the older when it comes to like health and wellness and providing and receiving resources organizationally?
So I think a lot of it has to do with communication and communication style and understanding your receiver group, right? Like your audience,
Mhm.
because the way that you talk about wellness with new people coming into the business, I'll call them kids because they are, is different than, the folks who are looking to sunset their careers, right? When I started 26 years ago, nobody talked about wellness being a benefit. There were no programs. It was like, yeah, we had a weight room and that was it. And it was on you as an individual, really, to do that work. Versus now, where we understand the impact and the need to be physically healthy, mentally healthy, financially healthy. We need good nutrition, and so all of those things are getting built out now into law enforcement programs, and people are seeking that out when they're evaluating, which agency I want to work for, right? Like that's a
Mhm.
recruitment tool that I think wasn't present in law enforcement when I started. I mean, it wasn't. Um, and so now the younger generation is actually coming into the workplace with an understanding of the importance of these things and with kind of the expectation, right, that
Mhm.
that my employer is going to start providing, these resources to me. And when you talked about, building a wellness culture, building a culture of being physically and mentally well, it starts before they walk into the building now. For the folks that have been here for a long, long time, you really talk about the importance of wellness in the context of life after law enforcement, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the place that they're at in their career. And I think you have to approach these conversations through that lens because it's not gonna resonate, with them like it will for a young person starting a 30-year career coming in knowing that these resources are going to be there for them. Now you're taking people who maybe haven't prioritized that stuff for 20 years, haven't been mindful about, staying physically fit and being mentally healthy, and being able to share out and do things to keep their mind right. Um, Now you have to talk about that in the context of making sure that they're, as well as they can be and whole when they get done doing the work. Because I think that I had somebody tell me when I came to the job, they said, "Hey, your goal is 30 years. That's when we can max out in our retirement. And your goal after that is 30 years, right? Like you want to get exactly out of what you put into the retirement system. You want to get that in longevity." And when I started, it was like, cops were dying 5 years after they retire. And we're seeing that change now over time because of these conversations. But that's kind of like that long-term goal. You want to be able to enjoy the fruits of all the hard work, all the late nights, all the missed family events, right? Like we owe it to the people that we love too, um, to be in a condition to do the things that we haven't been able to do for the 30 years of our law enforcement career just because of the nature of the work. I think in 26 years, there have been 2 years out of my entire career where I haven't been on call for one reason or another. Did 6 years in a gang unit. I did 14 years on our SWAT team. It was one of those things where it was like I was always engaged in some level of work, and I struggle even now with the whole work life, personal life balance stuff. Um, but there were a lot. I have 3 kids. There were a lot of missed events, missed birthdays, on our way to do something as a family, and the pager goes off. That's how old I am. We have pagers. And the pager goes off, and I got to drop what I'm doing and go to work. And so we owe it to them on the back end of this career to be able to be healthy enough to do the things that we want to do with them.
That is such a powerful message. And I wrote that down of like, we owe it to our loved ones to be there after the career because maybe there were things that you missed. And I appreciate you saying that because I think anyone who's listening to this, I'm hoping will resonate with that of like, hey, like you owe it to the people that have stuck by your side who love you to be there for them for as long as possible and making it another 30 years. I love that. Like 30 years on the job, 30 years retirement. I think that's
Absolutely.
great.
Yeah. We
And
pay a lot of money into these retirement systems, and I'm gonna try and get it all out. You know what I mean? And one of the things that I
100%.
told my kids was, you know, they didn't get to pick me. And they also didn't pick this career for me. They've had
Mhm.
to, love me the way that I am, and they've been along for the roller coaster ride, right? The ups and downs and all the unpredictability, and they've been there. And so I feel like making sure that I'm in a condition to be able to spend, as much meaningful time as I can with them after this career's over, um, is incredibly important to me personally, and I hope, that's true for other people too.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that keeps coming up in this conversation is, that you keep talking about too, is like the ability to talk about this stuff, and how important that is to be able to share as a leader. These are the things that are important to me. This is what I want for my life and my family, and being able to talk to your team. And I love that you also said, as far as like organizationally and creating that culture is to meet people where they are. And that is so important. And I have learned the hard way, trust me, like I laugh about this all the time because if people always look at me and they're like, why do you work with law enforcement? And I'm like, I don't feel like I chose you. I feel like you guys chose me a little bit because there are a lot of easier groups of people I could do this with than law enforcement. But
We're a difficult bunch. Yep.
but the best. I mean, I love working with you guys, but the thing is that earlier in my career, I was under the impression of like, and I was really strong about this. I was like, we're all adults. We can call things what they are. And, I'm going to use my personal example of this. So I would say, hey, like it's yoga and we're going to call it yoga.
Mhm.
And then I realized over time that if people aren't receptive to the things that you're saying, it's never, ever going to benefit them ever.
Right.
Like and so I had to learn over time of like, okay, some people are going to be receptive to that and some people aren't. So how can we change the way that we communicate what we're doing so that more people are receptive to it? And what I learned is that most people aren't resistant to the outcome. They're resistant sometimes to maybe the name of what we're
Mhm.
doing, or for example, like if I said, hey, and again, I'm going to use that analogy. I walk into like a briefing room and I'm like, hey, how many of you want to do yoga? maybe one or two people will like raise their hand,
Yeah,
that are like, and California is different. I think maybe more people in California would because it's, a little bit more progressive. But if I say, hey, how many of you want your backs to feel better? 80, 90% of the room is going to raise their hand. So if
absolutely.
I said, okay, well, this is what we're going to do to get there, they'd be like, sign me up. Let's do
Yeah,
it. So they're not resistant to the outcome. But if I walked in and said, we're going to do yoga, they're going to be like, no.
yeah,
And so I do think it's important. I love that you said that. I think it's important that no matter what it is we're doing, that we are catering how we're presenting the information so that we're presenting it in a way that is more well received. And I do think that's based on your audience.
absolutely. And I think, like I said, we have, I think, three different generations now in the workforce, and all of them want and need different things and want information in different ways. And so, from a leadership perspective, especially when we're talking about a wellness program, to your point, the message has to be tailored for sure.
Yeah. And can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more about your wellness program? I know that you're doing a lot of really great things because we've talked offline about, some of the programming and initiatives that you have. Are you willing to share some of those things that you guys are currently doing organizationally?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll kind of go in chronological order if that's okay. I think for a long, long time, we have contracted with a psychology group. They do a lot of work with law enforcement agencies in Northern California specific to, critical incident debriefings, things like that. That's been in place for some time here. We're probably 5 or 6 years into having a pretty robust peer support team. And it's not just, sworn law enforcement officers. We have professional staff members from, every rank and every unit who are a part of that group. There's probably over 30 folks in our organization who are trained and who meet on a regular basis. And actually, there's a regional collaborative effort now because we sit on the east side of the San Francisco Bay Area, um, major metropolitan area. We have 14 different cities in our county alone, and so there's this growing network of peer support groups who are training together, who are offering services together. When something happens in a neighboring city that's significant, we offer our folks to be able to go and help. So that's in place. We have contracted with a group called Solutions. Um, they're in the building quarterly, and they do a training day once a year where they provide uh, information on all things wellness, physical, nutritional, mental, financial. One of the things that we overlook is the financial wellness component of what we do. I always tell people when they come into the business, 22 years old, you're on probation. Cops get paid well in Northern California. Maybe hold off on buying the $100,000 truck and the boat.
Mhm.
Um, be thoughtful about that as well. So we have a group that comes in quarterly. We've recently contracted with a group called Sharp Performance. They are a collective of first responders and former military who do individual performance coaching. So they have a huge list of folks that individual employees can choose from. They can meet on a regular basis with these individuals, usually virtually, unless somebody's, from the region. Um, and really, going back to meeting, it's meeting people where they're at and trying to figure out ways to recenter around their why and how to optimize, performance
Mhm.
through coaching. And one of the newest things that we've done, and this was an officer-led initiative. We did an employee engagement survey a couple of years ago, asking for folks to, share innovative ways to make the organization better. We had a person who is one of our homicide detectives, um, lifetime military person, high-ranking person in the Army intelligence community, who has been overseas, has been through a whole bunch of experiences and said, "Hey, what would it look like if we created a police mental health like full-time position?" Right? This is, it's not a cop. It's somebody who has that expertise that could be on staff full-time that people would have full access to. What would that look like? And so we took that and really kind of ran with it. We spent the better part of about a year, year and a half doing research, building out a job spec, going to the personnel commission, trying to sell it to our council and our city manager from a funding perspective. And happy to report that we finally established that position, recruited for it, and filled it. So we have actually a licensed psychotherapist whose name is Scott Turner. Great guy, who's on staff, and not only is he kind of managing some of the wellness programs that I spoke of, but he has his own physical space in the building where he's actually doing, clinical work and case management with employees on a one-on-one basis. Um, I'm happy to share, some of my thoughts, and because, we built this thing out, we kind of created a base model, and now we're upgrading and scaling and
Mhm.
recognizing some of the challenges that we've faced with standing that up. But he's really getting a lot of folks that are actually coming in to talk to him. Sometimes just in the aftermath of something that's happened in their personal or professional lives, that's created some anxiety or trauma. But now he's also meeting with folks on a regular basis. And one of the benefits of having him in that role, and I think this is important for folks who have an interest in standing something up like that, is he was a member of the organization for about 8 years in an administrative role before that, while he was going through his training to get his PhD, and so he had relationships already in the organization. I know cops a lot of times don't want to talk to people unless they're cops or
Mhm.
have that experience. It's one of the reasons why we went with that sharp performance group, because those folks have gone through a lot of the things that our staff have.
Mhm.
And so Scott has already built relationships with people in the organization. So even though he's in a new role, and doing some really, really important work, in my opinion, folks aren't defensive when he walks in the room.
Right.
Folks aren't defensive when, he stops them in the hallway and asks them how they're doing. So I think there's a huge benefit. And for folks that are considering standing up something like that, I mean, I think having somebody that either has a relationship or that credibility, is just going to make that integration much more seamless.
Yeah, and the one word that I wrote down, it seems like, is there's trust.
Hmm.
And I've had a lot of conversations, and this is not like an opinion of mine, it's just something that I've heard. So I'd like to preface that, but
Yeah,
I've heard that maybe there's a lot of distrust with EAP systems and, maybe some experiences that haven't been the greatest with that. And so it seems to me that you've, brought everything in-house with someone who people trust and can talk to consistently. That's the other thing that I heard is, an EAP, not that I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I've heard that, maybe you don't get the same person every time, you don't get that like consistency. So having someone that's consistent that people trust, it sounds like has been successful for you.
absolutely. And I think that, I mean, that's why we've seen the early success that we've seen with that program, just based on that, exactly what you said. People trust this person. And that's important too, because when you bring a clinician and embed that person in the organization as a full-time staff member, the question always becomes, well, okay, I'm going to come in here and talk about my stuff, and then you're going to run over and tell the chief and the command staff, or you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
um, he's been very, very clear with people that, hey, listen, there's confidentiality rules with this stuff, right? I don't go to the chief. I don't talk about, the conversations that we are having individually. He and I meet probably about once a month just as a check-in. And what I will do is I will say, hey, Scott, any themes rising to the surface in the conversations you're having with staff, because I think it's important for us to be able to strategize around those. If everybody is having an issue with, feeling disconnected with their coworkers for one reason or another, well, what can we do as agency leadership, to try to address those things without getting into the weeds of, this person said this and this and this. So I think that's been a helpful exchange. But you really have to have that trust, because I think people, cops uh, we're great conspiracy theorists. When information is lacking, we kind of make up our own reality sometimes. And I think that there still probably is, to a degree, with some folks, maybe some of the older guard, right? Um, who are a little reluctant to go in there and start talking about stuff because of who they think he might talk to.
Sure.
Um, but trust it won't work without trust. It won't work.
And I love that you said themes. I think that's really smart to say, okay, what is the theme that's happening right now? And then trying to address the theme of it and try to figure out how you can address, whatever it is. Like you said, you gave some examples. I think that that's really smart. I've never heard that before. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that. The other thing that you said that I think is important to remember is that you said personal and professional stressors. You guys also have a life.
Hmm.
And it's not just job stressors. There's stuff that happens in people's personal lives too that compounds. And
Yep.
so having the ability to be able to go in and talk about both, and be able to process and work through life as well. I love that you said that because I think people forget that
Yeah.
you are also people
Hmm.
that have life outside of, the walls of the agency.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that's great about this position is that, it's not just, with the psychology group, they come out when big things happen and do a critical incident stress debrief. And I'm not saying that that's not an important component. Um, but this is anything, right? I mean, you can walk into Scott's office and talk about anything that you have that you're processing or that you're dealing with. And his commitment is to do what he can to work through that with you. And so I think, the EAP thing, again, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I agree with what you've heard. Um, it's almost, in some respects, checkbox, right? I've
Mhm.
used it, and met with a therapist at one point in my career, and it was not a fit, right? You could tell right out of the gate that, we weren't vibing. It wasn't, and so I think, this is a completely a different approach specific to us here at the police department, not the city organization, but, a completely different approach to have something that, is meaningful that everybody, professional staff included, because I know that, wellness has not always included them, right?
Mhm.
Um, Especially our dispatchers and communication center folks. They deal with trauma just like the officers do, if not, in some cases more, because they don't get to see the closure of events that happen in the field, and we forget about including them in a lot of these conversations. Anybody in the building has access to Scott, for any reason, so it's been great.
That's great. And it goes back to that team mentality.
Right.
It's like you're all a team.
Hmm.
You can't do it without dispatch. You
Absolutely.
can't do it without records. Like you guys all like work together as a team. And I love that you still have that team mentality of like
Yep.
everyone here who needs the resources has them.
Yep.
I know that you guys, I mean, it's across the country, but especially in California, there's a staffing crisis.
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about how wellness can be utilized as a recruitment tool. And I've heard that across the board that a lot of people who are younger and coming into this profession maybe aren't necessarily money motivated as much as they are motivated by how the organization is going to support them. I also think that wellness is helpful as retention, keeping everyone who is there as physically and mentally well as possible. So there's less injuries, less people leaving the profession altogether, less people who, um, maybe lateral because the organization isn't taking care of them. Um, can you talk a little bit about what you're experiencing with, recruitment, retention, kind of that staffing crisis, and how are you able to like still create that culture of wellness within your organization without like I guess everyone like being burnt out and like how do you balance that with maybe mandated overtime and things like that but then still having that culture of wellness.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I will say that. I think at our peak, so we have about 200 sworn authorized police officer positions here, and I think at our highest a few years ago, we were at 50 position vacancies. So, and that's just
Wow.
position vacancies. That's not including people that were off on some form of an injury. That's not including people that were in training. That's not including people that were, off on some form of family or military leave. And so when you look at the impact to the workforce, with those numbers, it's significant, right?
Yeah.
And so we were running mandatory overtime and still are to a degree now, with our patrol schedule. And so burnout is real. And I think, I'll start with the retention piece is that, when you're dealing with vacancies of that magnitude, it's even more important to have a wellness program to keep people whole, right?
Mm,
Because now you get a couple of folks injured and you go from a 25%, vacancy rate to even higher where you have these folks that are not deployable in the field. And so, on a retention level, I think people are going to, yes, pay benefits, all of that stuff is important. And I know in a major metropolitan area like ours, there's a lot of competition there, right? Because everybody's,
mm,
fishing in the same pool for people.
yeah.
Um, but the other piece of it, especially with the younger generation, is that feeling that the agency is going to support you and that they're going to do things and make decisions and bring in programs that are going to be about you as an individual and taking care of you. And so that's where the recruitment and the retention piece, I think wellness is so important for that purpose, right? And I have a lot of other ideas about things that I would love to bring here. I open up the door to let people say, hey, uh, you know, let's let's invite a coffee shop to open up in here. Let's do some food trucks once a week or a couple times a week. Let's bring in, we have an animal shelter that we run, so we bring the animals through, and bring them into the comm center, and it's like puppy play day in the comm center sometimes. And so, you know, really trying to think about ways to make sure that people feel like this is the place that they want to be, because organically they're going to tell other people about that, and that's a recruitment tool. I mean, that's a recruitment effort in and of itself. I did a class at the International Chiefs Conference a few years ago where they talked about this scientific research. I think it was Charleston, South Carolina, did this research on recruitment efforts, and digital marketing and current employee word of mouth were like the two. Like setting up a booth at a job fair is archaic.
Mm,
They were getting people into the organization because of other people that were in the organization. And so if you're building these robust wellness programs and giving people access to education and all the things that we know is important to their own individual growth and development and their longevity, they're going to tell people about it, and they're going to tell people about the culture that exists. And the goal is to have people want to be a part of it and to want to stay a part of it. So,
well, first of all, I love the creativity. I think that it's so cool to have these conversations where, you're thinking outside of the box a little bit, like puppy play day, like who doesn't want that? Opening up a coffee shop, food trucks, like those things are cool. And I think that it just goes back to what you said about creating that culture and having culture first. And then everything kind of falls into place once you have like a really good, strong foundation. And I think you're right. I think that when people like to come to work and they don't just drive past, the PD and go like shiver and like, ugh, like I don't want to be there, like if they're like, oh, like maybe I'll go say hi and like I'll go in for puppy play day or I'll go do the
yeah.
food trucks, like they are going to tell other people, hey, I love working here. And so I think that that's a really unique perspective of like start with the culture, try
Mhm.
to make people happy, and when people are happy, they'll spread the word for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've told our staff directly, you're the best recruiters, you know. Um, you know what it's like to work here. You know what our strengths and our challenges are, and you also know who you want to work with. And so, go out, and advertise. Yeah, and I think it's not easy work. It's stuff that you have to do on a regular basis, and we constantly sit and say, okay, how do we create space to bring people from, other parts of the department into the same space, um, where there's interaction when, there otherwise wouldn't be, right? We have a
Right.
two-story building, and sometimes the second floor doesn't talk to the first floor. And so, how do we create opportunities for people to get together in a room, for the team building piece of it? So,
Yeah, 100%. I know that you're doing a lot of great things. I mean, obviously we've covered a lot of what you do, and it sounds to me like you're really trying to hit on a lot of different aspects or pillars, if you will, of wellness, financial, physical, mental, nutritional, creating more of that culture of wellness and team mentality. What do you feel like, maybe it's a two-part question, but what do you feel like is maybe still missing in law enforcement as a whole when it comes to wellness, and or what is the biggest challenge right now with building out a wellness program and creating that culture?
So there's a lot of focus right now, in my opinion, on the physical and the mental, which is great. And I think those things, above most else, are critically important to longevity. The financial piece, I think, is something that is not really touched upon. I know that, like, for kids that are drafted out of the NFL now, there's a whole orientation that they go through where they talk specifically about, financial planning, financial wellness, budgeting. I remember being a new kid coming into the organization, and it's like, okay, this is awesome. You guys pay me to do this, and I'm making decent money. And so let me go, buy things that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford, or people budget um, around overtime, right? You're
Mhm.
not budgeting based on your base salary and your compensation package. You're budgeting on the fact that you have to work now 2 or 3 days of overtime. And so you're kind of out over your skis financially, and it creates issues. And so there's not a whole lot of coaching. There's not a whole lot of work in the wellness space that talks about finances yet, in my opinion. And on that topic, I think that's probably the biggest challenge, at least from my seat. Um, Going out and bringing in wellness solutions is critically important, but it's also something that has to be sold to the city manager and the council. It's got to be sold to HR. You've got to work with the finance department to figure out a way to budget for things that you might not otherwise have money for. And the argument, that I always try to make is like, look, you're paying now or you're paying later, right?
Mhm.
Through workers' comp and injuries and staff not being able to work. So where do you want to put your money? And the hard part is that, you know, when you're using public money, people want data, right? And they want to know outcomes and they want to know all these things. And that's not always easy to measure with wellness, right?
Mhm.
How do you create a data set around somebody's mental wellness? Do you know what I'm saying? And so I
Mhm.
think those are some of the challenges in being able to sell the importance of these programs to people who are looking at a spreadsheet in city finances and saying that we don't have the budget for that. And you have to work hard to try to convince folks that here's why this is important, particularly for the work that we do, that other city departments, outside of the fire department, um, they just don't do. You know,
Right.
you could be sitting in a patrol car for 2 hours and then have to jump up without stretching, without, doing anything to get yourself ready and physically engage in some pretty strenuous stuff.
Yeah.
Like in a matter of seconds, other folks in the city don't have to do those things. And so, do you want to pay up front a little bit, or do you want to pay a lot on the back end? And then how do you measure it? I mean, those are the challenges that I've faced in these conversations with other people. Yeah.
And I think that like proactive measures are always the hardest
Hmm.
because you're right. It's like, how can you determine if that person is going to have a mental health crisis this year or next year? How can you determine if that person is going to have an injury or not?
Yep.
I think that what we can look at as a whole is that there's a level of like high risk involved. And typically it's not if, it's when,
Hmm.
it's and we know that based off of other data points, and
Hmm.
so how can you reduce the risk? It's never going to be injury elimination. It's never going to be mental health issue or crisis elimination, but
Hmm.
how can you reduce that risk as much as you can? And I agree with you. It's hard to track that, but it's also like so necessary because especially if you're short-staffed, because it's a snowball effect. It's like
Yeah.
someone gets injured, they're out, then it's like now everyone else on the team has to pick up the slack and has to,
Mhm.
work harder for that. And so,
Absolutely.
and then they get more tired and more stressed. So
Hmm.
they're more likely to become injured and more likely to have some sort of mental health, issue in the future. So it's kind of the snowball effect. So getting in front of it is so important, but I can see how that could be a challenge and, convincing people maybe outside of the organization to pay for it now rather than later.
Yeah. I mean, I try to draw the connection to the things that they're knowledgeable about, right? Like, law enforcement agencies are ineffective if all we do is respond to things that happen, right? There's got to be an element of proactivity to what we do, and we got to use data to be able to drive that. But, if I know where a hotspot is in my beat, because cars are getting stolen there, and I decide with my discretionary time to do extra patrol or be present in that area, there's no way to measure what you've prevented, but we know it works, right? And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with these programs where you sit there and you go, look, um, even if an injury is sustained, be it physical or mental, um, these programs are not, there is a component designed for prevention, but there's also the recovery piece of it, right? Where you want to get people back whole as fast as you can so that they can be effective and be part of the team again, um, and come back to work and fill those gaps that are created when they're out, right? And you
Yeah.
want that piece of it too. And so trying to draw a nexus to things that, resonate with them, I think, has been a little bit helpful, but it's always a challenge, especially when you're asking for money.
For sure. But I think it goes back to what we talked about before about like knowing your audience
Yeah.
and like how can you speak in a way that is going to be received.
Yep.
And I'm sure that that takes different amounts of effort and
Artful
to,
communication. Yes.
yeah.
Artful communication.
If you could, I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
Like, if you could wave a magic wand and create maybe the most robust wellness program ever, or add one more thing to your wellness program in a perfect world, if funding wasn't a challenge, like what do you think would be the next step for you?
Ooh, I would say on-site staff. Um, Knowing cops, we have trust issues, right? We do a lot of things word of mouth, right? I remember doing concrete in my backyard, and you ask other cops who they've used because
Mhm.
there's a trust element there. If money wasn't an issue, I think I would have dedicated on-site staff 7 days a week to be able to individually run fitness programs, nutrition programs. We're building that to a degree with Scott's position on the mental health side. But having people who are on site, embedded in the organization, doing that work, you develop the relationship. There's consistency. You're gonna, if you're working with a trainer, um, and you see him in the hallway, you know,
Some accountability.
there's some accountability there. They're gonna be like, hey, missed you today, at the work or whatever.
Right.
So I think if I had, and I know that with shift work, with in the digital age, having app-based solutions is incredibly important, and I know that's part of the work that you and your group do, and that's I think incredibly important for especially for younger generations where that's what they're on all the time. So having those resources available there is an incredible part of this work. But I think for an agency our size, it probably, maybe not for a large agency where people don't see each other. But we have 333 total employees in the building. We live in one physical space. Most everybody outside of, the opposite side of midnights, folks have the opportunity to see each other. Um, if not on a regular basis, periodically. And so I think having people embedded in the organizations that are specifically tasked with doing that work, to me would be effective.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that insight because it's like every organization is going to be different in what
Mhm.
they need or what they're looking for. I kind of was like laughing internally a little bit because you're like, we're a small agency, and you're like, we have 300 people. Like, most of the
Yeah,
agencies I talk to are like, you know, like a lot smaller than that. So, but I'm sure California, it's all perspective. But
yeah,
I appreciate that because every agency is different and it
yeah.
depends on the culture, it depends on the size, it depends
Hmm.
on, the people who and what they want and what they need. So, um, my last question for you, and this is, why I started the podcast in the first place, is to share your words of wisdom with others who are younger in this profession. What is a piece of advice that you would give to someone who is earlier in their career when it comes to wellness? Maybe something that you wish you would have done or wish you would have known earlier, or maybe something that really helped you along the way to make it to 26 years.
Gosh, I think, well, I'm not that wise, so I appreciate it. I think honestly, ask for help. Um, and I'm not talking about, with a report or, with an investigation. I think that's important too, especially when you're new coming into the industry. But, there's a reluctance for people to recognize in themselves when they're not right and when things are happening. And there's a reluctance, I think, to ask for help because it's perceived as, a sign of weakness, when in fact, in my opinion, it's the complete opposite. To be able to have that self-awareness to go, you know what, I'm struggling right now and I need to, I need to talk to somebody who maybe has some expertise or can lend an ear and help me process. I didn't learn that until, I was well into my career. Because you're trying to build your reputation, you want to be seen as this, strong, competent individual. And the reality, going back to the point that you've already made, is that, we're a collection of human beings. And, we have the right to have feelings just like everybody else. We have to, we have our personal lives. We have these things that happen outside of the workplace that are important to us. Um, and so recognizing, having our own self-awareness to be able to say, you know, I, I'm struggling right now. I need to seek out, somebody to talk to. That's what I would encourage people to do coming into the profession. At the end of the day, um, we want to get through that 30-year career to be able to enjoy longevity in the aftermath of it. And, if we're not willing to have those conversations on behalf of ourselves, because of how we think we're going to be perceived, the chances are that we don't get there, right? And so I just would encourage people to recognize that as a sign of self-awareness and strength.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that is something that I wrote down. And I think that it is a mental shift that needs to happen, that you're viewing yourself as strong in the moments that you need resources instead of weak or broken. And my hope is that through these conversations and through, speaking to individuals like yourself who have that perspective and those words of wisdom, that we can shift that perspective so that you don't feel weak or broken. You feel empowered to seek out resources if and when you need them, and recognizing that this profession, there's going to be a point in time where you do need them because you are human and you can't make it through seeing all those things for 26 years without something to offload it. And
Yep.
so my hope is that, these conversations help to reshape that perspective a little bit and that you view yourself as strong because you are.
Yeah, and I just, just to add, I think we certainly appreciate you and the folks like you who have recognized the need in our profession and have taken so much out of yourselves to be able to give back to us. The work that you're doing is incredibly important. Going back to the question about scaling, if I could, I would, bring a solution like yours and some of these other folks to all the departments. I think that we're making progress, but we got a long way to go to get there. So thank you for what you do and keep up
Thank
the good
you.
work.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. And I appreciate your time so much. And
my
I
pleasure.
know, I'm out there a lot and I think we've kind of bumped into each other throughout the year. So hopefully we'll stay in touch and see each other at some point. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.